Hey, Andy. Good. I've got you seated right here.
I had some glasses in there. Took them out.
Good. Thank you. Good. I'll find out later here tonight. Well, it takes like 3 months to get one ordered. So. Yeah.
And regular meeting for the Fraser Board of Trustees and the planning commission starting from 4:33. And Garrett, I guess.
Alrighty, just sharing my screen. Okay. Well, good evening, or I guess late afternoon, trustees and planning commissioners. I appreciate you all making the time to be here at 4:30, our new workshop time. So this evening's workshop focuses on some discussions that we've been having over the past several months in our planning commission regarding possible changes to maximum height and density. Um, So to start off, just a brief overview agenda of this evening's discussion. I first want to go over specifically what changes are and are not being proposed. I'll go over what our current density and height standards are in each of our zone districts. Go over a summary of what our current density bonus program is, what changes are being proposed based on the conversation with Planning Commission, and what those impacts would be, and then discussion of a proposed height bonus program and its impacts as well. So to start off, I just wanted to go over what is not being proposed. You know, I've heard a lot over the past few months that we've had this discussion, the word variance has been kind of thrown around a lot. And I think the reason is because a lot of this discussion started after that variance application from Grand Park in September and the Board of Adjustment hearing. But I just want to make perfectly clear to everyone here in the room, online, for posterity's sake, what's being discussed is not any change to our variance criteria, the process by which a variance is granted. So none of that would change. Also, what's not being proposed is any sweeping across the board changes that would just allow taller buildings or allow greater density in all our zone districts by right. What we are proposing is a bonus program where the town receives certain benefits for those trade-offs of higher density or taller buildings. So again, what we're discussing, we have a current density bonus program. It's only in our Riverwalk zone district. What we have been discussing and what's being proposed is expanding that to cover other zone districts outside of just Riverwalk and the Victoria Village overlay. And we're also proposing changes to that bonus program that would allow for more residential units and thus greater flexibility in the sizes of those residential units. And then the last item that's being proposed and discussed is a new height bonus provision that could allow for taller structures so long as certain requirements are met that would benefit the town. And again, I apologize. I know most of the folks in this room are planning commissioners, trustees who do double duty as well. So a lot of this information is repeated, but I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. And of course, also, if you have any questions at any time, feel free to just interrupt and let me know. So I put a couple maps together. This one shows the current maximum unit densities in kind of the north area of Fraser. Those numbers are units per acre. So you can see right in the middle, the Riverwalk zone and Victoria Village overlay. Those have a base maximum density of 20 units per acre, but that 40 units per acre is what's allowed with the density bonus. You can see in some of our other zones, like the business, the B zone, the high density multifamily, those also have a allowable density of 20 units per acre by right. Um, some of our other zone districts, low density and medium density, single and multifamily, those are kind of unique. Really their density is based on minimum lot sizes. So for example, the low density single family zone, I think the minimum lot size is 6,000 square feet, and you can only put one unit that only single family is allowed. So that works out to a unit density of 7.3 units per acre, but it's kind of not a direct apples to apples comparison in the same way as the 20 units per acre, I would argue. Or when you're looking at some of the larger lots that we have, like in the business zone or the high density multifamily zone. Looking to kind of the south area of Fraser, especially the Rendezvous and Grand Park PDDs. These are very unique, but just to kind of give a comparison, just to refresh everyone's memory or for your information, these areas are governed by a plan development district with various planning areas. And each planning area is a certain acreage and allows for a certain number of residential units. And those acreages can change, units can be transferred between planning areas. So what I provided here is some areas that have been either fully developed or have at least gained Board of Trustees approval for their plat and plan. And these are, the approved or constructed unit densities in some of those different areas. So you think about probably the, densest areas of Grand Park, like Elk Creek condos, Cousins Point, or Alpenglow, which was recently approved last November. Those all have unit densities ranging from about 8 to 13 and a half units per acre. And then if you look in Rendezvous, even the densest parts of Rendezvous are less than 10 units per acre. So just to kind of compare them to some of our, more standard zone districts in terms of density. So it's all dependent on the plan of development. And each planning area within Rendezvous or Grand Park, there's not a specified density, but there is a specified total number of residential units. And then those planning areas have an acreage, a size associated with them. But both of them allow for changes to those acreages and those units amount. So like acres can be transferred, units can be transferred. So really the density is kind of determined at the platting stage. Um, so that's why I'm showing, things that are already approved and constructed and finished, or in the case of Alpenglow, it's approved but not constructed yet. Does that make sense? Okay. So this map is similar, but instead of density, it shows maximum heights in our zone districts. So as you can see, uh, the zone districts within Fraser range from 35 to 55 in terms of the maximum height allowed. Most of kind of the old town to the west of the railroad is at 35. Um, Riverwalk and business is at 45. Victoria Village is at 55, and so on.
Yeah, when you talk final height, just so it's clear, if you have a peaked roof, it's a certain height on the peak. It's not necessarily the top of the roof, right?
Correct. Yeah. So when we're talking about height, the way we measure height is if you have a pitched roof, as Parnell said, you actually measure to the midpoint of that roof. If you have a flat roof, then you just measure to the top of the structure. So again, in thinking about, a maximum height of 45, technically the total structure can be taller than 45 feet because it's measured to the midpoint of the roof.
Height limitation for both low density and medium density multifamily is 35.
Correct. Yeah. So low density single family, low density multifamily, medium density single family, medium density multifamily. Those are all 35. And then once you get above that, high density multifamily is at 40. Um, Riverwalk Business 45, Victoria Village is at 55. And kind of interesting, open space actually does have a maximum height of 20, just for any, structures that would be in a park, for example. But okay. And then now looking to the south area of Fraser again, primarily Rendezvous and Grand Park. So all of Rendezvous actually, their max heights are either 35 or 45, and I didn't want to break it out by planning area. Just, you know, Rendezvous's max heights are in line kind of with Fraser's zone districts, but within Grand Park, there are certain areas that are allowed to go above 45. So that includes planning area 2W, which is kind of the Willows Alpenglow area. Nothing that's been built or approved there has gone up to 75, but 75 is allowed within that planning area. So anything, you know, future future plats in 2W could go that high. Some of the areas, planning area 1WA, which is kind of like the village of Grand Park. Um, that can go as tall as 55 or 75. And then when you go across the railroad tracks, there's actually a couple planning areas that can go up to 50. But outside of that, everything else in Grand Park is either 35 or 45 maximum height.
At what point or when in history were those 75-foot heights approved?
Sure. So I believe it would have been in 2003 because the original Rendezvous PDD included, both Rendezvous and what is now Grand Park. And on that 2003 PDD, um, although the planning area boundaries kind of changed, there were those 55 and 75-foot heights even on that 2003 PDD. And again, they're on the 2005 Grand Park PDD as well, but originated in 2003 at least.
Does the annexation agreement talk about building heights?
I'm not totally sure. I would imagine if it does, it may just defer to the PDD document or plan itself, because that's where kind of these, yeah, maximum heights, setbacks, number of units and commercial square footage and things like that, because that's where those kind of live, not necessarily the annexation agreement.
Okay.
Yeah, correct. I mean, they are kind of, they go hand in hand. $35 or $45. I think kind of the 45-foot areas are closer to Highway 40. But again, I didn't break it out. Similar to Grand Park, some of the areas like Elk Creek condos can go up to 45, but I think like the Meadows is 35, for example. Don't quote me on that, but again, everyone good with this?
Mhm.
Okay. Okay, so that's kind of the lay of the land of our current standards. I then wanted to just summarize what our current density bonus program is. So right now, it only applies to Riverwalk and Victoria Village. In both of those zones, the density bonus allows up to 40 units per acre instead of 20. In the Riverwalk zone, there are two ways to meet this bonus. One is providing deed restricted affordable housing, subject to those, requirements. Or the other option is by providing, 40% of the ground floor area of the structure as a commercial use. For Victoria Village, the only requirement to meet the density bonuses with regards to deed restricted affordable housing. Okay, so what is being proposed? First, expanding this density bonus program to cover both the business zone as well as the high density multifamily residential zone. So kind of the logic behind this is that both of these zones allow the same base density as Riverwalk and Victoria Village at 20 units per acre. And if you go back to the map, the business zones and the high density multifamily zones, they don't really touch any of our lower density zones. So, you know, they have a lot of similarities to the Riverwalk zone itself. So, you know, I just kind of think it logically makes sense to maybe expand that density bonus program to those other areas. When talking about the high density multifamily zone specifically, the density bonus certainly would only be met through the provision of deed restricted affordable units. It doesn't really make sense to have the, ground floor commercial bonus tied to a residential zone. I think most, if not all, commercial uses are probably not allowed in the high density multifamily zone anyways. But it's proposed that the ground floor commercial requirement could be applied to the business zone as well, if that's something that the board would like to see. I think it's a balance of, on one hand, providing the option of two different ways, or if, the board really wants to incentivize more affordable units, you could just go that direction and just have that one provision in the business zone. Also, what's being proposed, if this density bonus was expanded to these other zones, then the deed restricted units would be at the same AMI as in the Riverwalk zone. There is a difference between Riverwalk and Victoria Village at 120 and 80%, but as we've discussed with the Planning Commission, that 120 and below AMI captures roughly 75% of renting households in Grand County per the Fraser River Valley Housing Partnership study. So we felt that 120 amount really captures a good amount of households.
I guess, especially in residential, but there's that one small block of I guess multifamily on one side of the track.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I tried to do a little bit more research onto maybe why. Yeah, and it could be just some quirk from when our land development code was overhauled in 2018. I don't really know why those were zoned like that, if that happened at that time or if they rezoned later.
It's just the,
Yeah, I
there's,
I think it's actually right next door to you, Katie, like 162 and 168 buyers.
so those are Katie Fisher's lots.
Yeah. And they've been like that since the 70s.
Interesting.
Well, they backed up to the trailer park, and I don't remember the whole story, but it had something to do with the trailer park and why they allowed the trailer park to be medium density, single family. And even though the trailer park fits in there with the trailers, it is actually above the medium density. Yeah, which brings up a different issue. We'll worry about that later.
Yeah, I mean, I think,
But yeah, that's been there since the 70s for whatever reason.
yeah,
Anything on that lot?
Yeah, Katie Fisher has
It's
a
four
house,
lots.
4
Oh,
lots,
that's her house.
2 of them. There's 2 houses on.
This one right here. Just that little box. So there's Mill Avenue there, and there's the trailers, and there's the funky little alley.
That's right. We could do a tower there.
so
Fisher's Tower.
I think, it is kind of a strange enclave, and maybe some weird quirky legacy zoning there. I think one lot just has a single family home. I think the other has a single family home with an ADU on a detached garage. So, I mean,
That's right.
they are currently at a much lower density than in theory would be allowed. I don't know, in having this discussion, if it would make the board more comfortable to, in tandem, seek to rezone these, but I would also just be cautious about, removing, what's the word, kind of like development potential from these lots, or taking away, um, you know, that from the landowner, if that makes sense, but
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And Robertson Altus. So
No.
Katie owns both of them.
Yeah.
Actually, I think she has 5 lots there.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I do think something like medium density multifamily would be a more appropriate zone for them,
Yeah.
and it could still allow greater density than what currently exists. So some, redevelopment potential, or what have you. But I do kind of agree that high density isn't necessarily an appropriate zone maybe for those lots, but maybe there's some history that I don't fully know behind
Yeah.
them.
I guess down the road, that's a question for Katie on a, not on a board level, but on
Yeah.
a personal level.
includes your site.
Yeah, let's go to.
Well, I will say as far as I think the height bonus there is certainly a valid point, but as far as the density requirement, well, let me just go back to what's being proposed here. Those lots are probably quarter acre or less each, I would imagine.
Lots are 25 by 100.
Okay.
Old Town Fraser.
Yep.
150, 125, or
25 by 100. So it takes 2 lots to build on unless you got a trailer.
although we changed that too. You can't go that single lot.
Can't hear Andy.
Yeah, I think that's right, Andy. Because there was people that owned single lots and they found out they couldn't build and there's houses on each side of them. Yep, yeah. And there's one in the corner I think they built.
Well, I think it's a good thing to look into, especially if we're leaning towards implementing this into the high density multifamily zone.
That's a residential street.
Right.
Across the street is the low density and
Yeah. Surrounded by low and medium density
Yeah.
residential. So kind of getting back onto what's being proposed, as far as changes, item number 2. So when that density bonus is met, whether it's the provision of deed restricted units or commercial, like in the Riverwalk zone, we would just remove the unit per acre cap entirely. So, it wouldn't be 40 units per acre. It would be as many units per acre as you would like to be able to fit or can fit, of course, subject to all other zoning requirements, right? Open space, height, parking, setbacks, etc. So really the reason behind this is, I think in a way the unit cap could incentivize larger units or kind of prevent a range of unit sizes. So just for example, speaking broadly in terms of parking requirements, a studio or 1 bedroom unit requires 1 parking space. A 3 bedroom unit requires 2. So effectively, you could swap out 1 3 bedroom unit for 2 1 bedroom units because they have an equal number of parking spaces, right? Swapping out those unit amounts wouldn't change your minimum parking required. But it does change the total number of units you have. So, if even with the density bonus as it is now, let's say someone could build 10 units, but they had enough space and parking to build, 15 1 bedroom units, and that's what they felt that, would be the best development. This would kind of give them that flexibility to do so, if that makes sense.
Discussion of units. Grant the regulation.
Yeah. Yeah. So in Granby, they do have a zone district. I think it's their central business zone, kind of centered on downtown Granby, where they don't have a residential unit cap. And they've had some recent land use applications there that I think for all intents and purposes went smoothly. Um, Again, it's just, you don't necessarily have to fit within some somewhat arbitrary unit per acre number. It's more so checking, okay, the development is proposing X number of units. Are they still providing the required parking? Do they meet the setbacks? Do they meet the open space? It's et cetera. So, yeah, I think that's really the main impact. It helps just give flexibility on the side of development, I would say.
Right. Yes, Andy, I agree with you on that. It'll drive smaller units. The biggest holdback to any development, though, is going to be parking spaces. Because Victoria Village can't use any of their density bonus because of parking.
But these would all have to be deed restricted affordable housing units.
So not all of them. Our current density bonus states that 20% of all units provided would be deed restricted. So for example, the Kozlik development, they got the density bonus by providing deed restricted units. I think they have 10 units total and 2 of them are deed restricted.
20 total, 2 are
20.
restricted. but they also got each building. So the back building, they got 2. They did the workforce housing units. And then on one of the buildings, they did the commercial.
Thank you. Yes,
The
sorry.
front building is
Yeah, thank you.
commercial
Yeah.
bonus
Yeah.
and got it for commercial, and the back building got it 2 units for
Right.
affordable.
Thank you. Yes, yeah. So 2 units out of 10 on the back building, so 20%. And then the front building was covered by the ground floor commercial. Thank you, Cardinal. So again, in speaking about that, so not all the units would be deed restricted, but that same 20% calculation would apply under this. Just because there's no unit cap. Again, developer proposes to build, 10 units on a site and they're utilizing the density bonus to do so, then 2 of those units would be deed restricted, for example.
Okay, so this second bullet point needs to spell that out.
Oh.
Sure. I guess,
Deed restricted.
yeah, I
20%.
yeah, I kind of glossed over here on the summary, the 20% of all units are deed restricted for occupants, et cetera, et cetera. Nothing would change with that. It would still read, 20% of all units provided on the site would be deed restricted if the density bonus is utilized. So again, no proposed change to that percentage. Any other questions or comments? So I think I kind of touched on why it would be a good idea to potentially implement these changes, but I just wanted to reemphasize them here. So expanding the density bonus to other zones outside of Riverwalk and Victoria Village could not just create more residential units in general, but also just more deed restricted units, right? So if there's a property in the business zone that would like to seek higher density, but also provide deed restricted affordable units, they could do so under these changes. And again, removing the unit per acre cap could incentivize the construction of more types or sizes of units, particularly studio and 1-bedroom units. Again, all things held equal, if a development is providing, for example, 10 units that are all 3-bedroom, then they have to provide 20 parking spaces, so 2 spaces per unit. Or they could provide 20 units that are each 1-bedroom, because each 1-bedroom unit only has 1 parking space. But again, it's that unit calculation that changes, but not the parking in that case. So.
Yeah, and our 2-bedroom are 1.5.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So you could also do the math with 2-bedroom. I guess that'd be,
Yeah.
14 or 15 or whatever. Yeah. And one thing that I just wanted to mention, kind of a case study behind this, the Riverview condos. So this plat was approved, I think, in 2022, but it's set vacant and undeveloped. And, I think there are a number of reasons why. Certainly, market conditions with interest rates and construction material and labor costs, certainly. But, just one thing that I thought was interesting, the building footprints you see kind of on the north side of the property, those are each 2-story condo buildings. And there's a total of 20 units proposed on the site. The site is about 1 acre. It's in the business zone. So the maximum density is 20 units per acre. So they're at the maximum density allowed. However, if you notice here on the parking requirement, because these are all 1-bedroom units, they only have to provide 1 space per unit, so 20 spaces. But this site is actually providing 33. They're already over parked. They're providing 33 spots. But it's the density requirement that's preventing them from adding 10 more units. And again, these buildings as platted are only 2-story. In theory, they could add a third and add, 10 more units, in theory. And if this density bonus was expanded, they could do so long as, again, 20% out of those 30 or 6 units were deed restricted affordable. And then, maybe that would make this development work, for example. So I think there's maybe some other, you could apply this to other cases, but this is just one unique one where there's an approved plat, but development just never occurred. So just kind of something to think about and consider. It's right next to the like fly shop in Grand Valley Flooring along Highway 40.
It's right between they'll be at that pond, 2 ponds out there. It's right
Yeah.
next to those.
Kind of like across from the meadows of Grand Park. Yeah. Just some other considerations behind removing this unit per acre cap on the density bonus. So parking requirements, as we discussed, you know, I think parking in general is often the limiting factor behind developments. Our code says that studio and one bedrooms both require one parking space. Something that was discussed at Planning Commission was implementing a half space per studio requirement. Um, and another thing that's been discussed kind of at staff level is the possibility of implementing a fee in lieu requirement for parking. Likely to be discussed further if and when the DDA ballot measure passes or fails. Either way would kind of help kind of determine what direction we go with this. But I think we could make these changes now and then kind of change the parking requirements later, to be honest. But it's just something else to consider. Um, if we're removing the cap on units, while also lowering parking requirements, then certainly even more units could be built. Studio units, for example, but uh, so keeping them the same is one possible option, but reducing that ratio for studios could again incentivize those types of units. And then something else that was just kind of discussed was, our current code on tap fees. It benefits, apartment buildings that are purely residential in nature. So for example, 315 Fraser Avenue, which is the back Kozlik building, which is purely residential, um, paid lower tap fees than the front building because of this, um, provision in our code. And, I guess one thing that I'd point out is that 1 and 2 bedroom units are at 0.3 SFE. A 3 bedroom would be 0.4. Studio is 0.25. It kind of depends on the unit mix, but if you had more units that were smaller, I think the tap fee would be greater than fewer units that are like 3 bedroom, for example.
Right.
Just kind of doing that math in my head. But again, another thing to consider if we remove this unit density cap with the density bonus, we could always look at changing this as well. But the bottom line is incentivizing smaller units could result in higher tap fees for like apartment building projects.
Jared,
Yes.
question,
Mhm.
back to the impacts from a possible fee in lieu of parking system.
Yeah.
Is that, you're saying strictly for the Riverwalk zone where we really don't want to have cars? And would the fee in lieu of parking mean you could essentially pay a fee that might go into building a parking deck?
Yeah, I think that's kind of what's being discussed at a high level. The intent or vision kind of for the Riverwalk area is to have a consolidated parking facility. One way to fund that would be through this fee and lieu structure. So again, I think in thinking about that, it would likely just be restricted to the Riverwalk zone and or the DDA boundaries because they're not one and the same. Some properties that are proposed to be in the DDA are zone business. But exactly, I think that would be the intent behind it.
Well, plus you'd get more units built that way and smaller units built
Absolutely.
that way because you wouldn't have to provide a car parking space for each unit.
Mhm.
And as we talked about before, about a lot of the younger people
Yeah.
aren't getting driver's license.
Right.
They don't plan on having a car in the future.
I think
Right.
that's a good idea. I think we ought to pursue that sooner than later.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, yeah, it's certainly something that we would like to implement.
Would that work?
So I think broadly speaking, in order to implement a fee in lieu structure, you have to have some kind of study. I think in our case, hopefully could be as simple as, you know, a parking structure, consolidated parking facility costs X, and we determine a dollar amount per space that is offset. So let's say a development with their unit mix or whatever is being proposed, they have to provide 20 parking spaces. But to make it pencil out space wise, they can only provide 10 spaces on site. So they would pay some dollar amount X times 10 parking spaces that they're not providing to meet that minimum requirement. And then that money would ultimately go to fund construction of like a consolidated parking facility.
But in the interim, we have to have parking.
Absolutely. Right.
Well, you
So,
can have surface parking. You don't have to have a tower at first.
Yeah.
It's already
right.
one level.
We
Uh,
have land for service park.
So it's not-
Yeah, well, that's just it. You have to have land. The ski area with their new development they did for the housing for their staff, those 300 beds, their parking is paid for parking. So if you want to have a car, it's 100 or 200 bucks to park across the street, across US 40. There's no parking in front of the building. You have to walk and then,
The other side of Highway 40.
Yeah.
right there.
yeah. That, I think that's where it is because that's where all the cars seem to be parked now.
Interesting.
So that's something else you could do.
People parking structures around town.
Right.
And parking town, there's a program, parking meters that go up tremendously in price during busy times. And people park in parking garages by the bus, and if tourists by the bus into town, and employees too, because employees can't park there in the place where they work, they need to park in a parking garage right in town in the morning.
And their bus system helps a lot with that too, because of
What's that?
their bus system, it's really good over there. So,
Bus systems partly paid for by.
Yeah.
Seat
their
tax.
associates.
yeah, right.
Seat
Yeah.
and parking garages. So
Who's currently looking into available land that the town owns now that could be put into at least surface parking to kick this off?
Town's not, doesn't have any, do they?
Well, we're currently informally using the lot at the end of Clayton Court for parking. Paul and his team, Public Works, they put down some millings, so we actually have some good hard asphalt down there for parking, and we're advertising that as such.
In the mural park, we're using that as parking.
Parking is for parking. But one thing that I would like to have a discussion with is that something that we've been talking with some of the landowners over on Clayton Court about is having a workshop series to kind of look at the downtown area of Clayton Court. Talk about the vision that the board and the community would like to see. What is their vision that they're seeing architecturally and design wise for that site? And look at things like consolidated parking. Okay, parking is an issue. We need to address that. They could do the land park dedication fees, or we can hold them to actually dedicating some land. Which I think you need for parking. And I think if they're gonna move forward with development that requires ground floor commercial, it's in their best interest to have that parking.
Absolutely.
So the design that we're working on for Clayton Court will have parallel parking on both sides of the road on Clayton Court. But yeah, it's a challenge, and that's, I think, if we can have a discussion with some of these landowners to say, what is the vision for Clayton Court, and work collaboratively with them, I think we can kind of come to a consensus of what makes the most sense, and let's have a unified approach to this versus just waiting for a plat submittal.
And for 80 million, we could buy the 500 acres that I don't believe has any water rights.
Oh,
Like that all surface parking.
so is that the Hoyer?
The Jones's property across the street. The whole yard, 128 acres. They haven't found any water rights for that either yet.
Mm.
So that'd be a good place for a school and open parking. Structure.
was that 500 acres total over there?
Ways away.
Yeah, it's 500, 544 or something like that. Yeah, at
Are you
80
talking-
million.
Are you talking about the pole yard?
So it's 129 acres that surrounds the pole yard.
Oh, okay.
Then on the other side.
Yeah,
That's, a lot of that surrounds the sewer plant, what better thing to put next to a sewer plant than a parking lot?
Yeah.
right.
That's a long way from town.
With the really, yeah, but it is a long ways. Yeah, people aren't gonna park there and shop at our stores.
Oh, you have shuttles, good, that's the,
Yeah,
I mean, that's a little far out, close would be
Yeah.
better,
Yeah.
close would be better.
So again, one thing that I'll be looking at all these items is working through our comprehensive plan update, which is gonna include, look at our zoning that we currently have, looking at our parking challenges that we're working through, looking at community needs that maybe can be better negotiated through a potential annexation agreement for anything to the north. That's a great thing to think through. That's something I haven't thought of, honestly. Looking at that land in those discussions is if we wanted to look at some offsite parking for, especially for employees, which could free up, right, 15% of the parking or more downtown. I mean, that could be a benefit to.
I was just in Fraser Auto and they're complaining that they're getting ticketed where their employees parking on Boylston Park and talk to Matt and say, Matt, guys are gonna have to park somewhere else and walk to work.
Yeah.
So, but that's what happened in Breckenridge. They realized that the town was filling up with employees before the tourists even showed up.
Yeah.
Because of full cars.
Right.
No, that could work well for a park and ride program.
Just another question. How does the railroad play into this? I mean, people take the rail down to Denver and back.
Yeah,
Where do they park if they're gonna go down and back for a day or two?
they park right there at the Amtrak,
Yeah,
and there's adequate parking there.
It's not used for snow storage.
But one of the things, Governor Polis was here a few weeks ago and he was riding the train and the main initiative that they're talking through is a commuter rail that's gonna go from Denver to Craig
right.
and just back and forth. And actually being able to leverage that for some potential workforce, I think will be fantastic. And also offset the impacts of people just taking their vehicles everywhere they go in those routes.
Well, I guess my question is, are we talking to the railroad at all about their plans to handle for potentially more people wanting to park to take their trains?
We've talked to them about that. They're working through a plan right now. They're redesigning and gonna start construction, what, Paul, next year?
They anticipate hopefully starting construction in maybe this summer, but it's going to be a 2-year project. So pretty much all of the parking along the railroad is railroad property.
Yeah.
So when Fraser public or Fraser visitors park there, it's the railroad not enforcing their right of way. So the railroad has plenty of room to put in parking as needed if they wanted to. They're just at this point, they're just leaving it as is and, but
If
they're
wanted to is the critical statement there.
yeah, if they wanted to.
Doesn't their right of way go from the center of the tracks 200 feet on either side?
It's 200-foot right away total, and I don't know if the
100
tracks, I don't know if both, where the center line is on that,
Right.
but they have a 200-foot right away. So pretty much all of Leonard is in the right of way.
Martin, what
it's-
do you think about the parking? What do you think about parking?
Me?
Yep.
Oh, I'm listening. It just seems like that, I'm agreeing with the direction we're going with the parking, some parking structure close enough for people to not, I think if you have to be bussed in from a parking spot, that's not gonna be good. I mean, people are gonna wanna be able to park and walk. So I don't know where you're gonna find the land, but it seems to me you really need to have a parking deck close enough for people to park and walk and not catch a bus.
In our commercial zone.
So
Yeah.
that whole
Commercial
strip
parking.
along the railroad there would be ideal if you could build a parking deck there that would accommodate both the railroad's needs and the town's needs for additional parking.
Yeah, it's not gonna happen in railroad right away.
I know, that's the problem.
Not at
Nothing ever happens in railroad right away.
Yeah,
Well, and it's pretty, there's a good amount of parking there along the railroad, but it's also narrow.
Yeah,
So I don't know if the structure could actually go there.
yeah.
But every chance we get, we keep advocating for we love the parking that's being available here. Any discussions?
So- the flip side, on the other side of the railroad track, that's Leonard Road, right?
Mhm.
Why don't we
Right.
shut down
On Old
Leonard
Town
Road
side.
and build it right there?
Well,
It's residential over here.
we discussed the one-way option. You do everything as a one-way, so you have
Uh-huh.
reverse in, well, I like the reverse and diagonal parking, but you have diagonal parking that opens up more spaces. There are some pieces of land over by the Murdoch Center. There's the hot tub store
Right.
on the corner there. That's a place that would be it's hard to build a house or a shop on there, so it
Yeah.
might be a good thing to buy. The piece I have listed next to the Holiday Inn makes good sense for a parking garage.
Didn't that come to planning commission?
It
at
did.
one point for,
Yeah, then
A
he couldn't get,
development,
he
but
couldn't get the units he needed, so
okay,
he's selling it.
but that would be a good spot.
Yeah, just trying to think off the top of my head, well, what else is out there that has some room?
And the J and L.
Yeah, J&L,
Yeah.
J&L would be a good parking garage type area, that would work.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's just right there in your core downtown, and then you still have room to mask it with business fronts on both sides.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
the advantage of having two roads at being on a corner. You know, we've talked a little bit about the idea of shutting down Clayton Court for some events or something, which would be awesome, but you
Right.
can only do that if you have that consolidated parking area that has access that is not just Clayton Court.
Right.
If you could use that off Fraser Avenue, I mean, that's, it's on Fraser Avenue, Clayton.
Any leads on that building at all, or?
What's
Oh,
that, Andy?
the construction company's moved out of that building. Any leads on that at all, or?
Well, they do, yeah, they have a laundry facility.
The laundry's
else
still
going
in there, yeah.
now, so.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I've had a couple conversations with Wally, and he's interested to know what the town's interested in, and I think he's somebody that we would absolutely want to have part of those conversations
Yeah.
about the downtown area.
I guess my thought was that fee in lieu would be good, but it's gonna be a drop in the bucket for the cost of building a garage,
Yeah. It's huge.
you know? So
Well,
if you had,
that fee in lieu, it's probably gonna be around $50,000 a parking space.
I mean, it could be
Back up.
fairly substantial. Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
you think how much that real estate of that parking space is worth, so.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, because a normal surface lot, according to people that we talked to, heard from, it's about 35,000 right now, 38. And once you
Per-
stack it, it's 45,000.
Per space or,
Yeah, per space.
yes,
Per 10 by 20 space. I mean,
Yeah.
wow.
so recognizing that we only have 10 minutes left, and the great discussion though about the parking stuff. But I guess just to recap, I feel like everyone here is generally in favor of expanding the density bonus, at least to the business zone. There's just some questions about those properties in Old Town that are zoned high density multifamily. Correct? And that's maybe the main reservation to expanding it there.
well, you could ask the owner of that if you could exempt that piece.
Sure.
Because it's in the middle of town, I mean, it's in the middle of Old Town.
Yeah.
Fraser, so.
Or if they'd be comfortable rezoning to medium density.
Should just build a medium density.
Okay. So I'll just go through this quickly. The height bonus discussion, this really started after the variance application by Grand Park. This slide just shows that height bonuses do exist in other communities, and they're tied to a range of different things. Could be affordable units, could be open space, green space, increased setbacks. Colorado Springs have them tied to like sustainable development or transit-oriented development. Pagosa Springs, they have it set up to where if you meet the density bonus, then they can waive the maximum height restrictions subject to planning commission and town board approval. So after discussion with planning commission, kind of where we landed on what it should look like is to only allow it in certain zones, Riverwalk, business, and or the high density multifamily, because these zones have the highest maximum height by right already. We would cap the height bonus to 55 feet. 55 feet is what's allowed by right in a lot of winter parks districts. So it would kind of match what they have, but again, give some benefit to the town if a developer wants to get that 55-foot height. And then another thing that Planning Commission was strongly in favor of was requiring a setback or sky exposure plane for any building height above what is allowed in the underlying zone district. So for example, that's 45 feet in the business and Riverwalk zones. There's some images there on the right which kind of show that principle. The one on the bottom left is actually directly from Town of Granby's code because they have this setback requirement in that central business kind of downtown zone where any height above 45 has to be set back at least 15 feet but their maximum height total is 50 feet in that zone. So we could absolutely implement something similar with the height bonus program. But really where planning commission was more uncertain is, the requirements to meet that height bonus. Some different options, we could just simply tie it to the density bonus, where if you meet the density bonus and you also meet the height bonus, we could tie the height bonus to affordable units, but at a higher ratio than 20%, such as, 30 or 40%. Or we could tie the height bonus to some completely other metric, like more open space, or land dedication for a park or some other use. And one thing that we could do as well is set a minimum open space acreage requirement so that, on a small lot, that's say only like half an acre, and in the Riverwalk zone, the minimum open space is only 5%. So, providing more open space probably isn't a huge challenge on a smaller parcel like that, maybe. So we could add some provision where, the minimum open space required is like half an acre total, or something along those lines. A minimum size to be a like usable community park amenity, something like that. Why should we implement a height bonus? Well, again, currently the only way to seek a height greater than what's allowed in the underlying zoning is to submit a variance request. And really, our variance criteria um, are fairly strict, as they should be. And there's not a lot of, circumstances that would, justify granting a height variance, I would argue. Winter Park and Granby, they both have zone districts that allow higher than 45 feet by right already. So if we were to implement a height bonus program, we would kind of be in line with our neighboring municipalities, in a way. And again, a height bonus could benefit the town through creation of more deed restricted units, preserving open space, or, implementing some other board priority. And we only have a few minutes left, but I kind of wanted to run through, I put
So
these,
the
oh,
the
go.
other, I think, important thing is our just ongoing discussion of one way to enhance affordability is to increase density.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
If they go 4 stories, then they have to put in elevators.
Right.
Mhm.
Is it affordable?
Or is it 3 actually?
I
isn't it?
think it's, no, I think it's over 3 stories. You have to
Yeah,
put
3
in.
stories isn't.
3 stories, you don't require an elevator.
Mhm.
An elevator can serve a lot of units too,
Yeah,
so.
and, well, anyway, and
Yeah.
it's good for old people.
Yeah.
One of the questions I had was around, and you kind of somewhat addressed it here, the number, the percentage of affordable units per project. So, I mean, I don't know where the 20% came from. What is kind of the right number for that? 30%?
Yeah, I
don't know.
to be honest, I'm not sure where it came from myself. I think it's a balance because, certainly with affordable units, you can only charge a maximum rent amount. So, to make a project pencil out, you need a mix of market rate and affordable units in generally speaking, with these density bonus programs and things like that. So, I don't know exactly what the right percentage is, but, I would just argue that any project that utilizes a bonus program to provide deed restricted units is an absolute win for the town. I mean, you look at the amount of time and effort that we're spending to build around 200 deed restricted units for Victoria Village, which is absolutely necessary. But if there's a way to get developers to build them themselves, right, through their typical market rate projects as well, even if it's 2 units here, 4 units here, I think every little bit helps, in my opinion.
And it would be a mixture of the percentage of affordable units and or the percentage of AMI. We tweak the AMI to kind of make it work, make the math work out.
Yes, so we could tweak the AMI as well.
If it's 120%, that's, I don't know what that is exactly off the top of my head, but that's a little higher than.
It's like 80,000.
Yeah.
It's not what,
I mean, what does that come out to rent per unit, I guess, is
2,200.
depends on the bath.
Yeah,
Anyway,
Yeah.
just a thought, maybe you could tweak, that percentage using the AMI as a variable to increase the number of units.
yeah, that's totally fair. I think it's a combination between, you know, a higher AMI opens it up to a greater range of possible tenants or occupants in that unit, right? Because you're allowing more um, incomes. But the higher the AMI, the higher the rent that's going to be charged as well. So it is a bit of a balancing act, but um, I feel like what we have is decent. Again, I don't know if there was much study behind the 20% and 120 figures, to be honest, but it is a balancing act to make it pencil out and worth on the developer's end to, you know, pursue that bonus.
And it's also been shown and proven that having low income housing mixed in with regular housing is much better than having it all by itself. The lower income housing stays in better shape, and the people end up being in a better life quicker than if they all live together.
Good diversity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sorry, go ahead.
Just a question. It seems that when we talk about AMI, and we talk about we want 20% deed restricted units with an AMI of 80% or 100% or whatever the number, have we ever seen it where you have, like, if you do 20% at 80% AMI and 10% at 100% AMI and 10% at 120% AMI, because
Yeah.
the issue seems to be we all want to see those 20% at 80% or at 80% AMI, but the developers want the higher rents to make everything work out.
Sure.
Maybe you could go with deed restrictions at more than one AMI.
Yeah, I mean, and that could be certainly something with like the height bonus, for example, or even a change to the density bonus. But I mean, just to take your example, the height bonus could be, 40% of all the units are deed restricted and it's at a range of AMIs or something.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not sure if that's too cumbersome on the side of a developer to have 40% of all of your units, but if you're removing the density cap and you can go up to 55, I mean, I feel like you're adding a whole nother floor and you have no unit cap, so you could probably make that pencil out, maybe. But again, it's a balancing act. So
And
Hmm.
the whole point is to try to incentivize the developers to put in some workforce housing. We need big projects. That's why we do Victoria building. Right.
Right.
Or the Mills Apartments, for example, those would be bigger. But yeah, it's not an easy, I'm with Lewis too. It's not easy to figure out what's the right AMI and what's the right, is it 20% or 30%? And
Yeah, can we do some more research on that? I mean, I'd be interested to see if anybody's kind of done the math on it and see
Yeah.
kind of what
120%
works out.
of AMI in a one bedroom, maximum rent was $2,100.
You got two developers in that.
That was the information you just gave me last time around.
They love talking about
Yeah, 80% was 14 on a one bedroom.
Well, are there other incentives you can give them, like, I don't know, tax breaks or something else that would sweeten the deal?
Right?
No. Dinner's not, no.
It's here.
Is it here? Oh, dinner's here, okay.
Well, we can still talk a little bit. We don't have to. Yeah, there's some people in the audience that might want to say,
Yeah.
but you
Well,
still have the
yeah.
last two pages. What do you got?
well,
Go ahead, flip through it.
I just have some more slides. I thought I might go through this on Google Earth as well, but I just wanted to show what the difference between 45 and 55 looks like. So this is from the north end of Clayton Court. This is on the town-owned property looking south towards Winter Park. This is just from Google Earth. Here is a 45-foot building, just for example. It hides the ski resort. Okay. And then in Google Earth, I did this like block mass, and this is 45 feet tall. You see it matches the building that was there. That's what 55 feet looks like. You can see the line and the height increase above it. I mean, your view is essentially unchanged from this vantage point, and this is just one building. The vision for Clayton Court is to have buildings on both sides, have 45 feet tall. So is adding that extra 10 feet going to create more of a canyon effect? Yes, that's true. But I think in terms of impacts to views, as has been discussed at Planning Commission, if you're standing on the street and there's a building there, your views are going to be impeded no matter how tall that building is. And then here's just a view from like actual photograph street view from that same point. I just wanted to show this because I can't show the pretty building model, but I can show the block mass. And again, it's this similar impacts to views. Yes, a 55-foot building is taller than 45. That's undoubtedly true. But the visual impacts between the two, I would argue, are very minor.
And the building on the right is only 30 feet tall.
But it's elevated, as up at,
Yeah, it's elevated.
It's
It's up
highway.
probably 10 feet,
Yeah.
so it's around 40.
Right. And just like, for example, as well, right behind the trees, kind of in the distance is the Holiday Inn. If you can tell from the slides, but, and then just one more example I wanted to show, this is Meyer Lot 2. This is the ground level Google view from Highway 40. Here's that 45-foot tall building. It blocks Byers Peak. Here's the block massing at 45, again, just to show its equivalent. And then with 55, you're just blocking more of the sky. Here's street view of the same location, Byers Peak in the distance. There's your 45-foot building. Your view of Byers is gone. 55, you lose more of the sky. So again, I don't want to discount loss of views at all, but I do just wanted to emphasize that visually, when you're standing on a street next to a building, the impacts are fairly minor. That's not to say that maybe some other vantage point from up on Meadow Ridge, whatever, the impacts could be different. And you know, just one other thing, I think, as was discussed, like these visuals are not very hard to put together. They should have been put together for the height variance application, and they will be required for any sort of height variance moving forward. But just kind of to ground us in reality, what we're talking about with 45 versus 55
And
foot
if you
tall
look, the
buildings.
power poles are average 35 feet.
Yeah, so yeah,
Yeah.
you got the power poles as
Well,
well.
Cornell, this is a point you've made over and over again at the meetings,
For 10 years.
that if you're in town or driving through town in a car, it doesn't matter whether it's 35 feet, 45 feet, or 55 feet. You're not going to see the mountains
Correct.
until you get out of that corridor, which is our downtown area, which is
Right.
what we want to develop.
Correct.
You guys want to provide a few minutes for
Sure.
any comments?
couple,
Anyone?
Anyone in
Open
the
question.
audience?
Come on up.
Come on up.
come chime in.
We need 2 hours for these.
I suppose I should say my name and address. Lee Touchfarber, 328 Park Avenue. So I thought that was an awesome presentation. Thank you for that. That was like definitely heading in the right direction. I'll say briefly, I moved here like, I don't know, 2 months ago, 3 months ago. So I'm kind of new in the area. And yes, I am a real estate developer. And I came out here strictly for the primary reason was to like try to shore up workforce housing. Because I see the issue everywhere in the mountain communities, and this one I chose to move to and help out. What I've found is like project after project, like land parcel after land parcel, I've put under contract, go through all the due diligence, get contractors to bid out the cost to build, and everything is just like upside down. And probably the primary factor has been density. So these density bonuses start to go in the right direction where things start to turn right side up, and then you can actually get a loan and bring in an investor and put up a project. So one consideration I thought might be appropriate is in determining what the affordable what the allocation of affordable units is, you know, these sort of rent capped units, 120 AMI or 100 AMI or whatever, is to have a pro forma based on actual like bids from a contractor, which any developer here has probably plenty of. And you can look at like if a piece of land has a density max of 20 units, and if you want to provide a density bonus so they can do maybe, you know, more like 30 or whatever the ends up being, the you can just plug in market rents for the market rate, and then if it's 20% for the affordable of that whole building, that would be 6 units of a 30-unit building. Plug in those AMI, those rents, because there's a chart out there, and then see if that works out. I can say you're getting into a really close zone, and it might be there, it might be a little bit off, but you're definitely, entering into a zone of like improvement where a project can actually go up. And that's probably a good thing for the community's goals. So those are my thoughts, is have an actual pro forma presented or tweaked and looked at, with different inputs live, is my thought. There you go.
What is the incremental cost between like a 20-unit project and a 30 unit? So the additional 10 units that you could add if you had a density bonus, it doesn't cost the same as the first 20 units, but
It costs less.
costs less, right?
costs
but is
less,
it
so-
50% less or?
No, not that much. It's the part of the reason it costs less is you don't get much benefit like a bulk discount from a builder or with 20 units or 30 units. You get that when you get like into 50, 100, 150 units. But you're not paying for any more land improvements, the horizontal part of the project. So that expense is already incurred, and now you're just paying for the boxes effectively.
Right.
So there's a discount, I can't tell you offhand, but it's not hard to find out, in conversation with a builder. They have these things dialed in.
And have like 120% is like our minimum, and then but maybe it would could go lower. Depending on how
I've
it
run the
comes out.
numbers. So you were saying like, what is the appropriate AMI?
Yeah.
Where does it not work versus what is that cutoff point?
Mhm.
I mean, it's pretty basic math. There's not too much variation. Like a 20 or 30 unit project that's apartments and a little bit of retail they're pretty similar, within this region from project to project. So it's just a matter of having a pro forma calculator, right in front of us and saying, well, let's look up the 120 AMI rent, and maybe it's whatever it is, 2,200 a month in rent. Plug that in and see, does that pro forma, does that does that project pencil out or does it not? And it's really easy, and you can say, okay, that did work. Would it work at 100% AMI? Then you can plug in those numbers and see what the end calculation is. Boom, you've got your solution. It makes it easier than just kind of feeling it out. There's just you guys have great ideas. There's just one more dimension, which is that financial dimension, which with that, then you've got the complete picture, the complete story to be able to make, decisions with. It's a thought.
Thank you.
So,
Okay.
so back to the point
got
that
it.
was
We have
made
to eat
earlier.
dinner.
We have others and.
But if you had a height bonus that included a range of AMIs to be determined what the actual number would be when you pencil out the pro forma, maybe it comes in at 100%. So you say, well, we want 30%, of your units to be 100% AMI.
Yeah, and it's just a matter of, I mean, that can take literally 3 minutes to test that out, which is the beauty of it. So, maybe that's the best way to go. I mean, I think a lot of people would say, what is, the lowest AMI range? Maybe that's one of the objectives. And it's just a matter of testing out 80, 90, 100, 120 and see what that cutoff point is. And voila, then you guys know that you're going to get projects, with that sort of financial dimension injected into the decision-making process.
So, is this?
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
Lee.
Thanks.
thank you. We will start our meeting at 6.
Continue the conversation.
Okay.
Thank you all.
I would encourage you guys, since Garrett runs these kind of workshops here, if you guys ever have thoughts, especially from the development community, you can shoot it to Garrett. I think that'd be really helpful. And that way you can kind of